The officers' club smelled like floor wax and cut lemons, and I had it almost to myself, which was the only reason I had come early. I was standing at the end of the bar with a club soda I had not touched, wearing a plain dark dress and low heels, reading the room the way I read weather. Who stood where? Who laughed too loud? Which corners the young ones drifted to, and which ones the old ones kept. You can learn a bass in 20 minutes if you keep your mouth shut and your eyes open, and I had spent 22 years learning basses, so I kept my mouth shut. The room was maybe a third full. A protocol sergeant was setting place cards at the head table with the patience of a woman who had done it 100 times. 2 lieutenants stood near the windows with drinks that were mostly ice. One of them kept glancing at me. He came over the way young men come over when they have decided a thing is theirs to fix. "Where's your husband, ma'am?" he said. He was tall and pressed and pleased with himself, a first lieutenant by the single silver bar, and he looked me up and down the way you look at a car you're not going to buy. "You can't just wander into the officers' club," he said. "This is a members' event tonight." His friend near the window laughed, a short bark that he covered with his glass. "Some wives think a nice dress gets them anywhere," the lieutenant said. And he said it to me, but he said it for the friend, because that is who insults are usually for. Not the person in front of you, the person you want to make smaller with you. I had flown through worse weather than one lieutenant. I set the club soda down on the bar, quietly, and I said nothing because nothing was the most honest thing I had. There is a version of me from 20 years ago who would have answered fast and clever and made him feel the size of a thumbtack. I had retired her. She got good people in trouble, and she never once changed a mind. Silence is not weakness. Silence is a decision about where you are going to spend the next 60 seconds, and I did not want to spend mine on him. "The spouse's mixer is down the hall," he said, softer now, almost kind. "The way you talk to someone you have decided is slow. That's probably where you want to be." I looked at him. I did not look at him the way he wanted, which was either flustered or grateful. I looked at him the way you look at a panel light you are deciding whether to trust. He held it for a second, and then his eyes slid off, because most eyes do. That was when the 2 men in dark suits pushed off the far wall. I had almost forgotten they were there, which was the entire point of them. They had spent the evening being furniture, a pair of unremarkable men in unremarkable jackets standing where they could see the doors. Now they crossed the room without hurrying and without stopping, and they came up on either side of the lieutenant and squared their shoulders at him, their backs half turned to me so that without anyone raising a voice, the geometry of the room changed. He was no longer talking to a woman in a nice dress. He was talking to a woman 2 men had decided to stand in front of. The taller one leaned in and said something close to the lieutenant's ear. I did not hear it. I did not need to. The lieutenant was still smiling when the words landed. It was a real smile, the confident kind, and it stayed on his face for a half second after his eyes had already understood, the way a house stays standing for a moment after the frame gives. Then it went out, not slowly, all at once, like a switch. He was still smiling when the taller one spoke. Then he wasn't. I want to tell you the rest of it, and I will, but you should know how I got to that bar, because the woman he saw and the woman who was actually standing there were 2 different people, and the whole story is the distance between them. I stepped out onto the covered walk that runs along the front of the club, because I wanted the moment to cool, and because I have never liked being looked at while a room rearranges itself around me. The evening was warm. The parking lot was filling, headlights swinging across the building and going dark, doors thumping, the particular sound of officers arriving at a thing they are required to arrive at. "Ma'am." A chief master sergeant had followed me out. She was in service dress, silver on her sleeves, her hair up regulation neat, and she had the calm, heavy presence of a senior enlisted woman who has watched 3 generations of officers learn their jobs. She did not salute, because we were both technically off the clock, and because she was the kind of chief who knew exactly when a salute helps and when it just makes a moment stiff. "You're early," she said. "They're not ready for you yet." "I know," I said. "I wanted to see the place before it saw me." She almost smiled. That's usually my line to the new ones. She did not use my title. She did not need to. She had clocked me the second I walked in, I was sure of it. The way she clocked everything, and she had let me have my quiet corner and my untouched club soda, because she understood that a person about to take on a whole base sometimes needs 10 minutes of being nobody first. "Chief Farrow," she said, offering it before I asked, because that is also what good chiefs do. "I run the command section for General Prowse until tomorrow. After tomorrow, I run it for you, if you'll have me." I'll have you, I said. I've read your file. I'd be a fool not to. I had spent 22 years being underestimated at first glance and correctly estimated by the end. I had stopped minding the first part, mostly. There is a small stubborn place that still minds, and it lit up a little at the lieutenant's voice inside, but I had learned to treat that place the way you treat a warning light you have already diagnosed. You note it. You do not let it fly the aircraft. There's a young lieutenant in there, I said, who thinks I'm somebody's wife. Farrow's face did something careful. Maddox, she said. Maintenance. He's not a bad officer, ma'am. He's a young one who's never been told no by anyone who mattered. Those turn into bad officers, I said, or into good ones, depending on who tells them no first. Yes, ma'am, she said. They do. Inside, through the window, I could see the room filling, the head table with its cloth and its little cards, one of which had my name on it in someone's careful hand. Tomorrow the base would be mine to answer for. Every runway light and every fuel truck and every 19-year-old with a wrench. Tonight I only wanted to see who it was made of. The night I earned the right to be greeted by a general was a night I mostly remember as noise and dust. It was 2013. I was a captain then. 31 years old. Flying an HH-60 in the eastern mountains of a country I will not name because the country is not the point. It was full dark. A ground team had gone out to a village and gotten into something bigger than the intelligence had promised, which is the oldest story there is, and now they were pinned on a slope with wounded, and the light was gone, and the weather was closing. The book had opinions about a mission like that. The book said wait for the fixed wing to soften the ridge, wait for the gun run, wait for a picture clearer than the one we had. The book is written by people who are trying to keep air crews alive, and I respect the book, and I have taught the book, and I broke it that night because the men on the ground did not have the time the book assumed. You could hear it in the voice on the radio. Not panic. Worse than panic. The flat arithmetic of a team leader who has already started deciding who he can carry. Ma'am, we're taking fire on final, my flight engineer said, calm as a man reading a checklist because that is the job. Copy, I said, putting her down anyway. I remember the LZ came up out of the dark in the green of the goggles, a bad little shelf of rock with the wind coming wrong off the ridge, and I held the aircraft in a hover, in a brownout so thick I was flying on instruments and faith, feeling the ground team load their wounded by the shutter, each one put through the airframe. You learn to fly by what the aircraft tells your hands. The book does not teach that part. Nobody teaches that part. You get it or you die getting it. One of the wounded grabbed the edge of the door. I felt it more than saw it. A weight pulling at the frame, and one of my crew hauled him the rest of the way in, and then we were heavy and we were taking rounds and I pulled power and we came off that shelf like something being born, ugly and fast and alive. I did not know his name that night. I knew the weight of him, the drag of a hurt man against the door, the way the aircraft flew different with him aboard. You do not forget a weight. You carry it for years without knowing whose it was, and then one day it walks up to you at a party and tells you its children's ages. But I am ahead of myself. They gave me a Distinguished Flying Cross for that night. I keep it in a drawer. I have never once looked at it and felt the thing they think you feel when they pin it on. What I feel, when I feel anything, is the shudder of each wounded man coming aboard, counted through my hands. Inside the club, the ground had changed, and it had changed without a sound. When I came back in from the walk, the two men in dark suits had repositioned. That is the word for what they do. They do not stand guard the way you picture it, arms crossed, glowering. They drift and settle, always keeping the doors and the principal in the same glance. Doyle, the taller one, had moved to where he could see both the main entrance and me. Nunez had taken the corner by the kitchen. Neither of them looked at the lieutenant now. They had already filed him undersolved. The protocol sergeant, whose name I would learn was Ackerley, had quietly picked up a place card from a side table and carried it to the head table and set it at the center seat. And even from across the room, I could read the shape of my own last name on it. The lieutenant, Maddox, watched all of this and did the math wrong. I could see him doing it. He had decided I was important the way a guest is important. Someone's spouse, after all. Maybe the general's, maybe a congressman's. Someone whose comfort he had failed to protect and who therefore represented a problem for his evening. He had not yet arrived at the correct and much simpler answer. He kept looking at the suits and then at me and then at the head table, and you could watch him building a story that let him keep being mostly right. The room did not gasp. I want to be clear about that because people always expect the gasp. Rooms full of military officers do not gasp. The room adjusted, the way a formation adjusts when the lead ship changes heading, each person quietly finding the new center of gravity without appearing to move at all. A few of them had put it together. You could tell by who had stopped talking and turned a shoulder toward the door. Nunez appeared at my elbow, close, her voice pitched for me alone. "Colonel," she said, "General Prowse is 5 minutes out." "Thank you," I said. I had never wanted men to guard my back at a party. That is the truth, and I will say it plainly because the whole evening turned on it. 3 months earlier, I had handed off a coalition personnel recovery task force in a theater I will also not name, a job that meant a lot of people knew my face, who I would prefer had not, and a threat advisory had come home with me the way a bad cough comes home from a deployment. The security office had assigned Doyle and Nunez to me through the transition. 90 days, they said. Standard for the profile. I had argued against it and lost, because you do not always get to pick which parts of the job follow you home. So there they were, 2 decent professionals spending their Friday night watching a room full of officers eat shrimp on my account, and there was a lieutenant who had walked up to the most protected person in the building and told her the spouse's mixer was down the hall. Maddox came to fix it, which was worse than if he had left it alone. He crossed the room with the careful stride of a man who has realized he is in trouble and has decided the way out is to be helpful. His friend, Fenwick, the one who had laughed, had gone quiet and small and was studying the ice in his glass as though it might tell him where the exits were. "Ma'am," Maddox said, low, leaning in with a confiding little smile. "Look, if you're somebody's guest, just say so. I can get you seated. No harm done. I didn't know you were with the General's party." There it was. He still thought the worst thing he could be tonight was rude to the right person's wife. He was managing the situation. He was, in his own mind, being gracious about my mistake. "What's your name and your shop, Lieutenant?" I asked. I did not raise my voice. I have found that lowering it does more. Something in the flatness of it reached him before the meaning did. He straightened a half inch. "Maddox, ma'am. First Lieutenant Trent Maddox, Aircraft Maintenance, 412th. 412th, I said. "That's a good squadron. You keep the jets, I'm going to need flying." He blinked. The math was getting closer. "Yes, ma'am," he said slower. Officers around us had stopped pretending not to listen. That is the thing about a room like that. Everybody is trained to appear absorbed in their own conversation while tracking 3 others, and I could feel the attention gather the way you feel a crowd's weight shift at a ceremony. Every instinct I had trained told me to correct him hard, correct him now, in front of the people whose respect he had been performing for, and let him carry the burn of it for a month. That instinct is not wrong exactly. It is just expensive, and it spends other people's money. A commander who arrives at a base by making an example of someone teaches the whole base exactly 1 lesson on her first night. And it is the wrong lesson. It teaches them to fear being caught, not to be better. I had served under both kinds. I knew which kind I would follow into weather and which kind I would merely obey. Every instinct I had earned told me to do it clean. I decided how the next minute would go before it went. I have made harder decisions with less time. That is not a boast. It is just the shape a career like mine leaves in you. You learn to choose the outcome first and then work backward to the words, instead of talking and hoping a good outcome falls out. I looked at Maddox, 24 years old, sweating lightly through good posture, still not quite believing the thing he was about to have to believe, and I chose. I would not ruin him. I would not let the suits keep him in the dark for my entertainment either, because that is just cruelty with better manners. I would tell him the truth, level, in a voice built for a cockpit, and then I would give him somewhere to put it that was not the floor. "Lieutenant Maddox," I said. "My husband isn't here. I don't have one. What I have is a change of command tomorrow at 1000 on the flight line, in a base that becomes my responsibility the moment General Prowse hands me the guidon." I watched it arrive. It arrived the way the ground arrives when you have been flying on instruments and you finally break out of the cloud, and there it is, closer than you would like. His face did the thing the smile had done at the bar, that half second of the old expression still hanging on the frame after the frame has already gone. Then it dropped, and under it was something I actually respected, which was pure, undefended understanding. No excuses yet. That would come. But for 1 clean second, he simply saw me, and it was the first time all night anyone in that room had. He gave me his name and his shop again, unprompted, quietly, the way a man hands over his identification at a gate. He has suddenly realized he was never sure he was allowed through. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "Colonel." The doors opened and the room came to attention before anyone called it, which is how you know a general has walked in. Brigadier General Elliot Prowse was a lean gray man with the unhurried way of someone who has stopped needing to prove anything to a room. He had commanded this installation for 2 years, and he was handing it to me in the morning, and tonight was the soft version of the handoff, the reception where the base gets to look at its next commander over shrimp and decide in advance what it thinks. He came straight across the floor to me, past the head table, past the lieutenants, and he put out his hand. "Colonel Callahan," he said, "glad you found the place." "Sir," I said, and shook it. "This is your wing tomorrow," he said, loud enough, because he was a smart man, and he knew what the room needed to hear, and he had clearly heard at least the shape of what had happened. "Tonight, it's your reception. Let's get you to the front so these people can put a face to the name they're going to be complaining about by Christmas." A ripple of the safe kind of laughter went through the officers. Maddox stood very still. Fenwick had achieved a stillness so total he might have passed for a coat rack. And then a man stepped out of the crowd near the windows, and everything I have told you about the night rearranged itself one more time. He was in the 30s now, a technical sergeant, broader than the memory but with a way of holding one shoulder that a body keeps after it has been badly hurt and healed. He stopped a respectful distance in front of me, and he looked at me the way people look at something they were not sure they would ever see again. "Ma'am," he said, "you probably don't remember a bad night in 2013. No reason you would. There were a lot of bad nights." He stopped, started again. "I remember the sound of your rotors coming over that ridge. I've thought about it about once a day for 13 years. He swallowed. "Technical Sergeant Emmett Ford. I was the one who grabbed your door. I've got 2 kids now, 8 and 5. I wanted to say that to you at least once before I retire, and I never thought I'd get to." There it was. The weight I had carried out of the dust, the drag against the door counted through my hands, standing on his own 2 feet in a pressed uniform in a warm room, telling me his children's ages. I am not a person who cries in rooms. I did not cry in that one. But I had to take a breath I did not let anyone see me take, and I put out my hand, and when he shook it, he held on a half-second longer than a handshake, and I let him. "I remember the weight," I said. "I never knew whose it was. I'm glad it was somebody with 2 kids." The room was quiet. It was not the quiet Maddox had made at the bar, that thin, embarrassed quiet of people watching someone get put in her place. It was the other kind, the kind a room makes when it has just watched the truth walk across the floor on its own legs and does not want to be the one to break it. General Prowse broke it gently, the way you are supposed to. "Sergeant Ford," he said, "I think the colonel would agree you just made her whole week. Get yourself a drink. That's an order from a man who's off duty in 14 hours and can't enforce it." Ford laughed, wiped his eye with the heel of his hand without embarrassment, and stepped back into the crowd. And the room let out the breath it had been holding and went back to being a reception. Louder now, warmer, the way a room gets after it has shared something. Prowse put a hand on my elbow and steered me a few feet toward the head table, into the small pocket of privacy that a general can create just by turning his back to a room. "I heard about the lieutenant," he said quietly. "One of my aides caught the tail of it. You want me to have a word with him? I can make it a memorable one. Last favor I do you before the base is yours. It was a real offer, and a generous one. A word from a departing installation commander is a heavy thing. It would have landed on Maddox like a piano, and he would have deserved a good deal of it." "No, sir," I said. "Thank you. He's mine now. I'll handle him Monday. Correctly?" Prowse looked at me for a second, with the frank, assessing look of a man who has spent a career deciding which of his officers he could trust with real weight. "Correctly," he repeated. "You know, most people, your first night would take the free shot. It's right there. I'm handing it to you." "That's why I won't take it, sir," I said. "If the first thing this base learns about me is that I'll ruin a lieutenant who insults me, then every good idea anybody has for the next 2 years dies in their throat before they say it to me. I'd rather they learn something else first." "And what's that?" "That I see people," I said. "Even the ones who don't see me." He nodded slowly. "Chief Farrow said you'd say something like that." He glanced over to where Farrow stood at the edge of the room, hands folded, missing nothing. "She likes you already. That woman has buried more bad commanders than either of us has met. Listen to her." "I intend to, sir." Chief Farrow drifted over as if summoned, which she more or less had been. "General's not wrong, ma'am," she said, when Prowse had moved off to work the room. "About the free shot, and about the other thing." She watched Maddox across the floor, where he stood alone now, Fenwick having evaporated to some safer part of the party. You leave that young man standing there, marinating in it for the rest of the night. That does more than any dressing down. Word travels faster than a reprimand. By Monday, half the wing will know a lieutenant called the new commander a wandering wife. And by Wednesday, they'll all know she didn't so much as raise her voice. That second part is the part that sticks. You've thought about this, I said. Ma'am, I have watched 26 years of officers decide who they were going to be in their first week, as she said. The loud ones I forget. The quiet ones run this Air Force. I went and stood next to Maddox, because leaving him marinating was Pharaoh's plan, and it was a good one, but leaving him marinating alone all night was not mine. He came to a kind of rigid attention when he saw me approach, the parade ground kind, the kind you do when you do not know what else to do with your body. At ease, Lieutenant, I said. It's a party. Ma'am, I want to apologize. What I said was out of line. It was disrespectful and it was wrong, and I have no excuse. You have a little bit of an excuse, I said, which surprised him. You saw a woman in a dress standing alone at the bar, and you filled in the rest with the laziest story available. That's not a hanging offense. Everybody's brain does the lazy thing. The offense is that you said it out loud, to make your friend laugh at somebody's expense. That part was a choice. He held very still. Here's what's going to happen, I said. You're going to enjoy the rest of this reception. You're going to eat some of that shrimp because it's good and somebody paid for it. And Monday, at 0800, you're going to report to my office, and you and I are going to talk about the difference between an assumption and a sentence. That's all. That's the whole punishment. A conversation. That's it, ma'am. That's it. Whether it stays that light depends entirely on the lieutenant who walks through my door Monday. Show me the one your squadron commander clearly thinks you can be, and this is a story you tell on yourself in 15 years to teach some smart-mouthed captain a lesson. Show me the one who talked to me tonight, and it gets more expensive. I let that sit. Do you understand the difference? Yes, ma'am, I understand it. Good. I looked at him a moment longer. For what it's worth, Lieutenant, the 412th has the best maintenance numbers in the wing. Somebody trusts you with real work already. Don't make me wonder why. He swallowed. No, ma'am. I left him there, and I did not look back, because a person absorbing something needs to absorb it without an audience, and I had already been enough of one. I want to tell you about the part of the job that does not fit on a place card, because the lieutenant at the bar saw a woman he thought had wandered in, and in a way he was not entirely wrong. Everyone wanders into a room carrying the whole invisible freight of how they got there, and mine was heavier than a nice dress suggested. The marriage did not survive the flying. I will not dress it up. His name does not matter to the story, and he was not a bad man. He was a man who married a captain and slowly understood he had married the flying, and that the flying would always get the calls first, and that a woman who breaks the book to go into a valley at night for strangers is not going to unbreak herself for a dinner reservation. We ended it clean the year I made major. I have a photograph of the two of us at my promotion, both of us smiling, and I keep it because we meant those smiles, and because I do not believe in editing my own history to make the current version look inevitable. Nothing about the woman at that bar was inevitable. She cost. There were crews I did not bring back. Not on my aircraft. We never lost anyone off my aircraft. But in the wider sense, the sense a commander eventually has to carry, there were names. There is a wall in my memory that I visit more than any physical one, and the maintenance of that wall is the actual price of the ribbons a lieutenant cannot read across a dim room. People see the medal. They do not see the thing you handed over to get it. That is not a complaint. It is just the true exchange rate, and I would like more people to know it, especially the young ones who think the ribbons are a costume you win rather than a receipt you carry. The task force was the last hard thing, personnel recovery in a place where recovery was frequently necessary and rarely simple. I ran it for 14 months. I brought a lot of people home, and I made decisions that I will be re-deciding in my head for the rest of my life at 0300 when the base is asleep and there is no one to perform composure for. The threat advisory that gave me Doyle and Nunez was the residue of that job. Some of the people whose plans I ruined over there are the kind who keep lists. So 2 professionals watch my back at a party, and a lieutenant thinks I am a wife who lost her husband in the crowd, and both of those things are true at once, and that is the job. By 10 o'clock, the reception had thinned to the diehards and the obligated, and by 11, it was mostly staff breaking down the tables. and I found myself alone at the head table with a coffee that had gone cold while I was busy being the reason everyone had come. Ford had found me again before he left. He had shown me a phone photo of 2 kids on a trampoline, a boy and a girl, mid-jump, blurred with joy, and he had said the boy wanted to be a pilot, and I had told him to have the boy write me a letter in 10 years and I would answer it, and I had meant it, and I had written Ford's name in the small notebook I keep for promises so that I would not let it become one of the ones you make at parties and forget by the parking lot. Doyle came and stood near the table, not too near. "We'll rotate off in about 3 weeks, Colonel," he said. "Threat pictures decaying. You'll have your privacy back." "Thank you, Doyle," I said. "You and Nunez made tonight easier than it would have been. Even the part with the lieutenant. Especially that part." He allowed himself the ghost of a smile. "He was going to keep going, ma'am. We just moved the conversation along." "You did. Get some sleep." Chief Farrow was the last one, of course. Chiefs are always the last one. She came and stood by the table with her cover in her hand, ready to walk out, waiting on me the way senior enlisted have waited on officers since the invention of both. "Chief," I said, "walk me to the car and tell me something true on the way. Tell me who I actually work for on this base, not the org chart. The real answer." She thought about it as we walked out through the emptying club, past the bar where a young lieutenant's whole understanding of himself had turned over a couple of hours before, out into the warm dark and the mostly empty lot. "The 19-year-olds, ma'am," she said, "same as always. The kid on the flight line at 0200 with a flashlight in his teeth. The one who joined because it was this or nothing back home. Generals come and go, colonels come and go, begging your pardon. Those kids are the only permanent thing on any base I've ever served. And every decision you make lands on them eventually, whether you meant it to or not." She settled her cover on her head as we reached the edge of the light. "You do right by them, the rest sorts itself. You do wrong by them, no medal on your chest will save you from what this place will quietly decide about you." "That's the truest thing anyone said to me all night," I said. "It's the truest thing I've got, ma'am. I save it for the ones I think can hear it." I drove off the installation that was going to be mine at a few minutes past midnight, and for a while I did not feel like a colonel at all. The gate guard came to attention, and I returned it, and the barrier lifted, and I was out on the dark county road that runs along the fence line, and the base lights slid by on my right. The ramp lit up amber, a single jet on the line under a work light with the small, moving shape of somebody under it, a 19-year-old with a flashlight, exactly as Farrow had promised. I slowed without deciding to. I looked at that far, small figure doing the actual work of the actual Air Force at the hour when generals and colonels are asleep, and I felt the whole strange arithmetic of my life settle over me the way it does sometimes late at night. I felt like the lieutenant I used to be, not Maddox. Me, at 24, first assignment, absolutely certain I understood the machine I had joined and absolutely wrong about it in ways it would take me 2 decades to learn. That lieutenant had also once looked at a senior officer and filed her under something smaller than she was. Everyone does it going up. The question the job keeps asking you, over and over, at every rank, is whether you will keep doing it once you are the one being filed. I thought about the drawer at home, where the Distinguished Flying Cross lives under a stack of unremarkable paperwork, and about how the medal and the sleepless arithmetic are the same object seen from 2 sides, and about how a lieutenant at a bar had looked at the front of me, the dress and the quiet, and had not been able to see the back of it. The drawer, the wall, the 14 months, the weight counted through my hands. That was not his failure. That is just what a first glance is. A first glance is the front of a person. The whole discipline of leading people is learning to wait for the back of them before you decide anything that matters. I got home, and I did not sleep much, which I had expected, and at 0500 I stopped pretending and got up and pressed my service dress and looked at the woman in the mirror, 44 years old, and told her the thing I tell her before every hard morning, which is that she does not have to be certain, she only has to be honest, and that those are different, and the second one is the only one available anyway. The change of command was at 1000 on the flight line, and it did not care about my sleep. They do it outdoors when the weather allows, on the ramp with the aircraft as the backdrop, because the aircraft are the point and everyone knows it. There was a formation of airmen standing at parade rest in the morning sun, hundreds of them, the actual wing, the people whose lives were about to be routed, partly through my decisions. There was a small set of bleachers for families and dignitaries. There was a narrow platform with 3 people on it, and a guidon, that little flag on its staff that means in the strange sign language of the military, the soul of a unit, the thing that is handed physically from one commander to the next so that everyone can see authority move. I stood at attention in my service dress, silver eagles on my shoulders, the ribbons I have told you about arranged on my chest in their quiet rows, command pilot wings above them, and I listened to General Prowse say the things a departing commander says, and I watched the formation, and I found, 3 rows back in the maintenance element, First Lieutenant Trent Maddox, standing very straight, looking at the platform, looking at me. When the moment came, Prowse took the guidon from the outgoing command chief and turned and offered it to me, and I took it, and the physical weight of it was nothing, and the actual weight of it was everything, and I held it while the announcer said the words that made a whole base my responsibility, and the formation rendered a salute, hundreds of hands coming up as one, and I returned it. I want to tell you what goes through your head at a moment like that, because it is not what you would think. It is not pride, or not mostly. What went through my head, holding that little flag in the sun with a wing saluting me, was every person who had gotten me there and was not there to see it. The crew chiefs who had kept my aircraft flyable in the mountains, the team leader on the radio that night in 2013 whose flat voice I still hear, the husband in the promotion photograph, the names on the wall I visit in my head. You do not stand on that platform alone. You stand on it on top of everyone who is not standing there, and the honest version of the ceremony, the one they do not print in the program, is a colonel silently thanking a crowd of ghosts and absent friends while a live crowd salutes her. I gave a short speech. I had written a long one and thrown it away at 0600. The short one was this. I said that I knew most of them were standing in the sun, wondering what kind of commander they had just been handed, and that the honest answer was that they would find out the same way I would, one decision at a time, over the next 2 years. I said that I had learned exactly one thing in 22 years that I was sure enough of to build a command on, and it was this, that the measure of a unit is not how it treats the people it is trying to impress, but how it treats the people it thinks do not matter. I said I would be watching for that, in them and in myself, and that I expected all of us to fail at it sometimes, and to get up and try it again, because that is the only version of excellence that survives contact with real human beings. And then I said thank you, and I meant it, and I stepped back, and it was done, and I was the commander. Maddox, 3 rows back, was still looking at me. I did not hold his eye. A commander does not single out a lieutenant from a platform, but I knew he had heard the part about the people you think do not matter, and I knew he knew I had built the whole speech partly for him, and that was enough. Lessons that land quietly land deepest. Monday at 0800, he was outside my office, in his blues, 10 minutes early, which I noticed and approved of and did not mention. Chief Farrow showed him in. My office still had boxes in the corner, and the previous commander's nail holes in the wall, and the particular emptiness of a room that has not yet learned who it belongs to. Maddox came to attention in front of my desk. "Sit down, Lieutenant," I said. "This isn't that kind of meeting." He sat carefully on the edge of the chair. "You've had a weekend to think about Friday," I said. "I'm not going to make you perform an apology again. You did that already and it was fine. I want to talk about the thing underneath it, because the thing underneath it is going to follow you your whole career if nobody points at it, and I'd rather point at it now while it's cheap. Yes, ma'am. When you looked at me at that bar, your brain gave you a story in about 1/10 of a second. Woman, dress, alone, no rank in sight, therefore spouse, therefore lost, therefore beneath the notice this event requires. That story felt like observation. It wasn't. It was a shortcut, and the shortcut was built out of every lazy assumption the culture had ever handed you about who belongs in a room and who doesn't. I leaned back. Here's the part I actually care about. You are a maintenance officer. Your entire job is refusing to trust the 1/10 of a second story. A jet looks fine. The 1/10 of a second story says it's fine, and you have been trained correctly to say, I don't care what it looks like. Show me the data. Run the checklist, because the 1/10 of a second story is exactly how airplanes kill people. You already know how to do the thing I'm asking. You just switched it off for a human being, because switching it off for human beings is socially rewarded and switching it off for aircraft is not. He was quiet for a moment. I hadn't thought of it that way, ma'am. Most people haven't. That's why I'm telling you at 24 instead of letting you figure it out at 44 if you ever did. I let that sit. The people who work for you are going to include some who don't look like your idea of the part. The quiet one, the one with the accent, the one you assume is support staff. Every single time you run the 1/10 of a second story on one of them and act on it, you will be doing to them exactly what you did to me, except most of them won't have 2 men in suits and a general to correct the record. So the record will just be wrong, quietly, and they'll carry it. And you'll never know the cost, because the cost will be entirely theirs. I looked at him. Do you understand what I'm actually asking you to do? Run the checklist on people, he said slowly, the way I do on the jets. Run the checklist on people, I said. That's the whole meeting. Something changed in his face, the specific thing you hope for and rarely get to see. A young person actually taking a thing in rather than just waiting for the lecture to end. Ma'am, he said, can I ask you something? Go ahead. Why aren't I in more trouble? I insulted the incoming wing commander in front of half the officers on this base. I'd have understood a career-ending kind of trouble. Because I need officers who are more careful than they were yesterday, I said. And I get more of those by teaching than by breaking. Breaking you would have felt good for about a day and cost me a maintenance officer with the best numbers in the wing and taught everyone else to hide their mistakes from me forever. I'm not in the business of feeling good for a day, Lieutenant. I'm in the business of a base that runs right in 2 years. You're more useful to me improved than destroyed. I stood, which meant he stood. But understand me clearly, this is the cheap version. There isn't a second cheap version. Dismissed. He came to attention, and then he paused, and he said, Thank you, ma'am. And he meant it in the specific way people mean it when you have given them a thing they know they did not earn, and he left. And I watched the door close, and I thought, that one is going to be all right. That one is going to be better than all right. That one is going to tell this story someday to a lieutenant of his own. That is the only revenge I have ever found worth taking. Not the free shot. The long game. You do not get even with the person who underestimated you. You make sure they never do it to anyone else. The friend, Fenwick, the one who had laughed, turned out to be the harder case, which is often true. The one who throws the punch is at least committed to something. The one who only laughs has decided nothing except that he wants to be on the winning side of whatever happens, and that is a more slippery thing to correct. He came to me a week later, not summoned, which I noted. He stood in my doorway looking like a man who had been rehearsing in his car. Ma'am, I wasn't the one who said it, he began, but I laughed, and I've been thinking about the laughing. Sit down, I said. Tell me what you decided about the laughing. He sat. I decided the laughing was worse, in a way. Maddox at least believed his own story. I didn't have a story. I just thought it was easier to laugh with him than to say anything. And I've done that my whole life, ma'am. And I never thought of it as a choice until Friday, and now I can't stop seeing it. I looked at him for a while, because that was an unusually honest thing for a young officer to walk into a commander's office and say. An honesty like that deserves the courtesy of being taken seriously. The laughing is worse, I agreed. You're right about that. And most people go their whole lives without figuring it out. So you're ahead. The person who insults someone is one problem. The room that laughs is how the insult learns it's allowed. You were the room, Lieutenant. Now you know you were the room. So the only question left is what the room does next time. And that one's yours to answer, not mine. He nodded slowly. Yes, ma'am. Go on, I said. And Fenwick, thank you for coming in without being told to. That was the hard version, I noticed. He left a little straighter than he came, and I sat in my half-unpacked office and thought that maybe the reception had been worth more than the reception, that a careless night at a bar had turned into 2 young officers thinking harder about the kind of men they were going to be, and that this was not a bad exchange rate for 1 skipped free shot and a plate of shrimp I never got to eat. Let me tell you about the task force, because it is the part of my record that put 2 men in suits at that reception. And because it taught me the lesson I gave Maddox before I ever had the words for it, I took command of it as a colonel, 14 months of running a mixed team whose whole job was going to get people who could not get themselves out, aircrew down in bad country, a contractor taken off a road, a patrol cut off past the point where the ordinary machinery of rescue could reach them. We were the answer to the question that begins when the normal answers have all failed, and the people who called us were, without exception, having the worst day of their lives. And we did not always win. There was a night, about halfway through the tour, that I will carry the rest of my life. We had a location on a man who had been missing for 6 days, a soft location, the kind you act on knowing it might be wrong, and the window to act was narrow and closing, and the weather was turning, and the intelligence was thin enough to see through. I had a room full of people looking at me, some of them wanting to go, and some of them wanting to wait, all of them watching my face for the decision. And the honest truth is, I did not know. I have commanded enough to tell you that the movies lie about this part. The commander does not feel certainty descend on her like weather. She feels a room full of good people waiting, and a clock, and the wait, and she chooses inside the fog because someone has to, and the job named her. We went. It was the right call, and it was also very nearly the wrong one, and both of those are true. And the man came home to a family that had already started grieving him, and 2 of my people came home with injuries they will carry. And I re-decide that night in my head more often than the successful ones, because the successful ones do not need re-deciding. That is the arithmetic nobody warns you about. The winds go quiet, and the near things get loud, and a commander's interior life is mostly the loud near things, played at 0300 forever. The quiet one in that operations room, the one who had looked at the thin intelligence and told me plainly which piece of it she did not trust, was a young captain, an intelligence officer, exactly the kind of person a lazy glance files under support staff and talks over. I had learned by then, the hard way, with a maintenance troop's departure, on my conscience, to listen for the quiet, correct voice in the room. I made sure that Captain knew her read had shaped the plan. I put it in writing, it cost me nothing, and it will follow her, in a good way, the way the quiet troop I got wrong was followed by my silence in a bad one. You spend your whole career learning that the room is always trying to hand its best information to its least confident member, and that the entire craft of command is building a room where that member will speak. That is the tour that gave me the threat advisory, and the advisory that gave me Doyle and Nunez, who stepped in front of a lieutenant at a bar. So you can draw a straight line if you want to, from a decision made in a fog in an operations center to a smile going out on a young man's face in a warm room. The whole thing is connected. It is all one weight, carried a long way, set down for one evening at a reception where a boy mistook the front of me for the whole of me. I told you I did not know Emmett Ford's name that night in 2013, and that is true, but I learned the aftermath of that night in pieces over the years, the way you learn the true shape of anything you were too close to at the time. I learned months later that the team we pulled off the slopes had been down to their last decisions when we came over the ridge. I learned that the team leader with the flat voice had already divided his people into the ones he thought he could move and the ones he was preparing himself to leave, which is a math no one should have to do, and which some people do anyway, quietly, so the ones being counted do not hear the counting. I learned that the sound of rotors coming in against the odds had reached them as a kind of impossible mercy, a thing they had stopped allowing themselves to hope for, and that more than one of them had wept in the dust when they understood the aircraft was actually coming down. I did not know any of that at the controls. At the controls, I knew wind and power and the drag of weight against the door. That is the strange mercy of the cockpit. You are spared, in the moment, the full human meaning of what you are doing, because the full human meaning would be too heavy to fly with. You get handed the meaning afterward, over years, in installments, in a warm room at a reception, when a technical sergeant tells you his children are 8 and 5. And I learned, over those same years, the names of the people I did not reach. Not on my aircraft. I have to keep saying that because it matters to me, and because it is true. But a career in personnel recovery, and then command of a task force whose entire purpose was to reach people, teaches you that reaching is not always possible, that weather and distance and the enemy and the plain indifference of physics sometimes decide a thing before you can, and that a commander absorbs those names into herself, whether or not her hands were ever on the controls. That is the wall I visit. It is not a real wall. It is the inside of my own head at 0300, and the names are arranged on it in an order I did not choose and cannot rearrange, and I go there more nights than I would admit to anyone who had the power to ground me for it. People look at a colonel, and they see the eagles and the ribbons and the 2 men in suits, and they think, there is a person who has arrived. What I would tell them, if telling them were possible, is that no one arrives. You just accumulate weight and learn to carry it in a way that does not show, and the not showing is most of what people mistake for command presence. Composure is not the absence of the weight. Composure is a load-bearing wall you built out of the weight, on purpose over years, because the people who depend on you cannot use your honesty about how heavy it is. They can only use the wall. That is the woman who was standing at the bar in a plain dark dress, not a wife who wandered in, a load-bearing wall in low heels, holding up more than the lieutenant could see, choosing, out of long practice, not to make him feel the weight of what he had just casually leaned against. I have been the one who underestimated too. I want to be honest about that, because a story like this can curdle into a woman congratulating herself, and I have no interest in that. Early in my career, there was a maintenance troop, a young enlisted woman, quiet, who I decided without evidence was timid and probably not destined for much. I gave her the small jobs. I addressed the confident ones over her head. I did to her, in a low, steady way, over months, exactly what Maddox did to me in 10 seconds at a bar, except mine did not have the decency to be a single loud mistake I could be corrected on. Mine was 1,000 small, quiet ones. And then one night, on a broken aircraft on a bad deadline, when the confident ones I had been addressing were out of ideas, that quiet troop looked at a system the rest of us had misread for 6 hours and told us plainly exactly what was wrong. And she was right. And she had been right for probably 4 of those 6 hours and had not said so because I had spent months teaching her that her voice was not wanted in the room. I have never forgotten her. I looked for her years later and learned she had left the service after one enlistment, and I will always wonder how much of that one enlistment was me. That is my version of the wall, the small daytime wall next to the large nighttime one. It is the reason I did not take the free shot at Maddox. Not because I am gentle by nature. I am not especially gentle by nature. It is because I know exactly what it costs a person to be filed wrong by someone with power over them, because I have paid it, and worse, because I have charged it to someone else and watched her leave rather than keep paying. So when the lieutenant looked me up and down and asked where my husband was, some part of me did not see an enemy. It saw a young officer standing at the exact fork I had once taken the wrong way, and I had a choice about which direction to point him, and I pointed him the way I wish someone had pointed me before I cost a quiet troop her Air Force. The base is mine now, 3 weeks into it, and the 2 men in suits are gone, their threat picture decayed to the point where the security office agreed I could have my own back watched by no one but me again. I miss them a little, which surprised me. Not the being guarded, the being seen. It is a strange thing to admit that the only people who reliably knew exactly who I was, in every room, for 90 days, were 2 professionals paid to keep track of me. Everyone else got the front of me and filled in the rest. Lieutenant Maddox is doing well. His numbers are still the best in the wing. Twice now he has come to me with an idea that a more frightened officer would have swallowed, and both times the idea was good, and I have made sure he knows I know where it came from. Chief Farrow tells me the story of the reception has done its quiet work through the wing exactly as she predicted, and that the version people tell is not the one where a lieutenant got humiliated, but the one where the new commander could have humiliated him and didn't, and that the second version is worth more to me than any speech I could give. She is right. She is usually right. I have learned to walk her to the car every night I can and let her tell me one true thing. Technical Sergeant Ford's boy has not written me yet. He has 10 years. I will keep the notebook. I keep the Distinguished Flying Cross in the drawer, still, under the paperwork, and I have decided to leave it there, because a medal on a wall is a claim, and a medal in a drawer is a private receipt, and I have made my peace with the exchange rate. Some nights, the wall in my head is loud. Most nights, it is only a hum. The job goes on. There is always a 19-year-old on the flight line at 0200 with a flashlight in his teeth, and he is who I work for, and knowing that is the closest thing to peace this profession offers. If you have ever been looked up and down and filed under someone smaller than you are, I want to tell you what I know. You do not owe the room a scene. That is the first thing, and it is the hardest, because the scene is right there, and it feels like justice, and it costs you nothing you can see. But the scene spends a currency you will want later, and it teaches the room only to fear being caught, and fear is a terrible foundation to build anything worth having on. Hold your silence if you can, not because you are weak, because you are deciding where to spend the next 60 seconds, and the person in front of you is rarely worth them. The truth arrives. This is the second thing, and you have to believe it on the nights it seems least true. It does not always arrive with 2 men in suits and a general. Sometimes it arrives years late, quietly, in a room the person who wronged you will never enter, in the simple fact of the life you built while they were busy being wrong about you. But it arrives. Who you actually are is not a secret you have to defend. It is a weight you are already carrying, and weight does not argue. It just is, and eventually everyone in the room can feel it. And the last thing, the one I would tattoo on the inside of every young officer's eyelids if I could. The measure of you is not how the room greets you. It is how you treat the room once it learns who you are. Anyone can be gracious after the salute. The whole test is what you do in the half second after the smile goes out on the face of the person who insulted you, when the free shot is sitting right there and no one would blame you for taking it. That half second is the entire difference between being feared and being followed, and you will face it more times than you expect, and each time it will feel brand new, and each time it is the same choice. "Where's your husband?" they asked me. In a warm room, in a nice dress, on the night before a base became mine, I did not have one. What I had was 22 years, a drawer with a medal in it, a wall of names only I can see, 2 men paid to watch my back, and the whole weight of everyone who was not there to see me handed the flag. I was the reason the room stood up, and I still went home alone, that night and most nights. And I made my peace with the woman in the mirror, and I was all right. The end.